Alright, this one might need a little bit of explanation. So, back in October, I got the opportunity to go to a film festival. It's sort of an offshoot of the bigger festival in Boston, IFFBoston, and is instead a smaller event in the fall. And the purpose of this event was basically to give films that weren't able to come to the festival earlier because they were in bigger, more marquee showings or hadn't premiered yet, and give Bostonians a bit of a chance to see them before they came back in most likely late December, early January for their awards season releases. And it was just an amazing time. I got to spend one day almost entirely in a theater. I got there at noon for the first showing, and then I stayed there all until about 9:30. Didn't leave the theater once. I got up to stretch, of course, but I mean, we got food delivered to us, so it was an amazing time. Absolute blast. It was at my favorite theater. The IFFBoston guys put on an amazing event. It was just great. And every single film I saw there, I have a lot to say about. Unfortunately, I only just got the channel really going now, about 4 months later, but I still have things I want to say, and they're still relevant because of award season. So fuck it, let's talk about them. These videos will be divided up into 4 different sections. 2 of the videos will be dedicated to one film, these being the 2 biggest films to come out of the festival, and 2 others will be dedicated to the area in which they were from. So there'll be 2 films per those sections. One will be an Asian cinema section, one will be a European cinema section. And without further ado, let's go into our first one, Yorgos Lanthimos' The Favorite. Slightly surprising Oscar frontrunner. You know, it's interesting. For as many period pieces we've gotten about the politics and experiences of royalty and power players in the medieval and post-medieval world, I'm not sure if we've ever gotten one that explored Machiavellianism, at least not in any costume drama that I've seen. Really, the closest film I've seen to this film is probably Barry Lyndon, but that's just in how it's also a dark comedy set in a similar time period. Barry Lyndon as a character was, to be frank, much too stupid to pull off any of the power moves shown off in this film.
I have taken the ribbon from around my neck and hidden it somewhere on my person. You are free to look for it anywhere you will, and I will think very little of you if you do not find it.
I cannot find it.
So in that sense, The Favorite is very much a subversal of the costume drama, and one that still has its basis in the period's actual ideas. In other words, there's already an interesting tinge to it just from the forefront of the idea. It's important to note that this film comes from auteur-director Yorgos Lanthimos, a director who I adore that makes these strange, bizarre films that just twist everything in these unique new ways, and is the definition of a director that I never thought would get close to a Best Picture nomination, or being a Best Picture favorite, which makes the nominations this is up for all the more fucking bizarre. I just figured he was too unique, weird, and frankly innovative for the old farts at the Oscars. Anyway, he's mostly well known for his last 2 films, The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. Reasonably so, because they were both excellent. The Lobster is hilarious, dark, crazy, dryly satirical, and dripping in an honest-to-God loneliness in a world that feels perpetually constructed. I adore it. Meanwhile, Sacred Deer is a brilliant genre subversion that plays with horror ideas in the abstract, and ideas so shaking that I literally couldn't stand up after it finished. So, seeing more from Lanthimos was absolutely something I was looking forward to. The film certainly takes aspects from both these films in its delivery. The dry wit of The Lobster and the backstabbing elements also present in that film form the backbone of this film, and the period doesn't dampen the playfully dry, double-sided, curse-filled dialogue one bit. Meanwhile, Sacred Deer's innovations and Lanthimos' uses of natural light and bizarre camera angles, including many fisheye lenses, are still here and as wonderful as ever. Really, technically, this film is absolutely continuing in the steps of Lanthimos' beautiful filmmaking legacy, and it's a fantastic looking film, and it delivers it with extravagance. The acting as well is phenomenal. Rachel Weisz clearly took so much pleasure in this role, I'd be shocked if she simply didn't have a blast every day on set. She simply becomes this character in her full maniacal wit. Meanwhile, Olivia Colman finds herself in an ungodly compromising role that presents her in a very unflattering manner. But I gotta give her credit. She completely commits. Nicholas Hoult is also pretty fantastic in his performance too. I've never seen him quite take a role like this, but his air of superiority and yet clear inadequacy when compared to the two female leads is communicated wonderfully by the way he walks, holds his head, and his occasional pauses and stuttering when it becomes clear he's been outdone. But by far, the star of the show, in my opinion, is Emma Stone. Sure, Weiss, Hoult, and Corman are all great, but Stone delivers maybe the best performance of her career. Sure, she may not seem to take as much pleasure as Weiss does in her role, but Stone's character has much more variance in her behaviors and storyline, and that provides her a space to really demonstrate this more well-rounded character. Sure, Weiss seemed like she adored the role and played it with devilish joy, but Stone seems so much more fleshed out in her actions. That is just breathtaking to see her move and act in every single scene. It makes every second with her feel like an absolute treat, and you just want to see her more on screen. Now, despite saying all this, I do have to say this is probably my least favorite of the English language Lanthimos films to come out yet. This film has a lot of problems. Like I said earlier in the review, this film bases itself on Machiavellianism, the idea that power should be gained by any means necessary, and heavily features manipulation and backstabbing. In other words, yeah, this film has a lot of backstabbing, behind the scenes schmoozing, lies, and on and on and on and on. And at first it's fun. There's an interesting factor to seeing a character we find kind and wonderful be corrupted slowly. But once that happens, it just kinda gets repetitive. Like, it's hard to not get tired of the constant confusion and manipulation when it keeps going and going and going and never stopping. You start to really lose your patience for it, and I get to the point where I just kept checking the clock. This film is also really hurt by its length. It does not need to be over 2 hours long. 90 minutes would have fit it much better. I get that the way it unravels into this complex web is part of the point, but it just sort of becomes a drag for me when it just keeps piling on and on when it feels like we have enough interesting details as is. It starts wondering if they're just delaying the end. It just became a chore for me, in my opinion. My biggest problem with the film, though, has to come in its writing. See, this is the first Lanthimos film to not be written by him at all. And when I realized that, it made a lot of sense. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like his direction feels out of place or like the film doesn't fit at all in his filmography. It does. But it's missing Lanthimos' most quirky elements, which were my favorite part of his films. The veneer of surrealism and magical realism? Gone. Playing with genres and mixing them with abstract sci-fi? Gone. The stuttering, weird, non sequitur style of dialogue that seems so utterly out of place and creepy and yet socially inept that it emphasizes how constructed the world is? Yeah, that's gone too. Lanthimos' most iconic elements are gone. Sure, that last one doesn't really make sense to be in a story about scheming aristocrats, but I mean, it added so much depth to the characters in Lanthimos' film. I'm not asking that all his films be the same. As a matter of fact, I'm interested to see what he would do with this subject. But it's clear that this one is probably one of the more safer routes that Lanthimos will probably take in his entire career. It just doesn't feel as fresh or enjoyable as he usually feels. Really, it's a good film. Made by a great director, it's well acted, it's funny, and it's well shot. But it's hard to not escape the idea that it just never reaches the heights of his earlier films. That doesn't mean I hate it, not at all. I enjoyed a lot of parts of it, but I just didn't love it exactly. It gets very repetitive, it's overly long, and it gets shortchanged by its length. I'm sure that if this one was maybe cut down to say 100 minutes and was a little bit obsessed with continual one-upsmanship, it might have been one of my favorites of the year. But as it stands, it's far from a masterpiece in what's already a stunning filmography. And even separating it from that, I've seen much more enjoyable dark comedies this year. I gave Yorgos Lanthimos' The Favorite a 7 out of 10. You should still go see it, but honestly, it's not his best work.